everyone. Alex has hit the record button. Good morning. We're excited to see you all for our September training. This is training number 4, and we will be going into building your theory of action part 2. So let's get started. So the session overview for today, there will be 3 sections. Section 1 will focus on strategies. Section 2 will focus on outcomes. And then section 3 will talk about the implementation plan. The note catcher, I'm going to drop it in the chat for you all.
Just got it.
Okay, thanks, Alex. So you should have a note catcher. It has all of the resources that you need in the note catcher. So thanks. So the objectives for today, at the end of the session, you will have begun brainstorming assumptions that must hold true for identified strategies to be successful. So assumptions and outcomes, you'll notice, will be the 2 things that we talk about today as it relates to the plan. You'll be prepared to draft more smart and short-term outcomes for each strategy identified. You'll be prepared to finish your theory of action. You will have been introduced to the implementation plan, and you'll be prepared to complete your measurement plan after today's session. So section 1, strategies. So as a reminder, when we talked about the theory of action and the theory of action template, Alex, will you drop it for me, please, just in case you need it? The theory of action template. Theory of action means a logical visual explanation of how and why a strategy is expected to lead to a desired outcome. Previously in part 1, we talked about the problem statement. We talked about root cause, ideal state, and strategy. Next slide. Today, we will be covering assumptions and outcomes. But before we get into assumptions, we want to take about 3 minutes, and we would love for each district to share out or walk us through how your team approached reviewing the teacher resource library, which we will also drop for you. I'll drop it now. The teacher resource library. So we want you to walk us through how your team approached reviewing the teacher resource library and identifying potential strategies. And then we want to hear about what strategies did your team choose and why. So we'll take about 3 minutes to hear from both districts. So 3 minutes per district, so 6 minutes total for this session. So anyone can jump in first to talk us through the process.
I can go first for Lytle. We reviewed the resources on our own. Our meeting with our DQI team is set up for September 18th. So we, at this point, just have our own time that we've spent on it. Some of the possible resources that could work for our situation is under Not Enough Time, the Lasso 4 Lift resource for PLCs was something that could definitely work for our district. Under training, teacher training and support, the collaborative structures, really looking at how to embed collaborative time into our school day for our teachers. And then the last one, of course, we really want to look at everything as an entire district and not just secondary, but the timely redesign of the master schedule for the secondary level is definitely something that could work for our district. At this time, we haven't met to go over our theory of action as a team until the 18th. So I can't speak for that part yet until we get our heads together on the 18th. Anybody else in Lytle want to add to the conversation on your individual work?
Matt's not on here, but he's a high school principal. We talked a lot about that master schedule piece working for us.
So, anybody else from the Lytle team? Thank you so much. Exciting to hear that the resource library has been helpful. Love to hear from Temple.
Hi, I missed the meeting that maybe some of this happened in, and we have quite a few of our district administrators who are out. So I'll do my best to answer the question, and then it looks like Mr. Hobbs and Ms. Anderson are on. So if you guys want to jump in with something that I left out, then that would be great. And so we also reviewed the resource library individually. From what I recall, we did not identify anything that we felt would be helpful in this case, but we did discuss that we reviewed it, and there wasn't anything on that list that we felt like would be helpful for us. Not that we're perfect, just that we didn't see anything on the list that we thought would help with our situation. The strategy we chose, if I'm understanding the strategy that you're referring to, is to revisit the structure of our PLC, the way that we schedule our master schedules, the way that we communicate about PLC to make sure that there's a clear understanding of what that time is for and how we can protect it for teachers.
Anybody
Mr.
else
Hobbs
from
or Ms. Anderson, do y'all want to add anything?
Yes, what we saw was it's not that the things are not in place, they're in place, but we've got to kind of sure up how we use spaces. That we're using the space of time for PLC specifically for those things. So what we were finding is there was a lot of like logistical things being put there that we're gonna start working to cut out. And so I agree with Dr. Rogers. We didn't see anything that we really needed to like revamp. It's more that we need to make sure we're just clear on how we're using the time.
Okay.
Yeah, we just we all have a PLC period for our and secondary for our teachers. However, maybe it was not being communicated what that PLC is intended for. And so we actually started that process this summer with our in-service this for the beginning of the year of making sure we defined a conference and we define a PLC, and then define whenever we can have meetings. And so people know that we're going to protect that time for our teachers to plan.
Okay. Anyone else want to share?
I think that's it from the Temple team. Everybody else is playing hooky today.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank y'all for sharing. So let's jump in to the next slide, Alex. Assumptions. So on the theory of action template, you'll see where it says assumptions. And the definition of what we mean by assumptions is what must be true for your strategy to work. So what has to be true for it to work? So an example or examples of that, we assume that teachers will use protected time effectively for instructional planning. We assume that school leaders will implement the revised schedule with fidelity. We assume support staff can be reallocated or trained for classroom coverage. So these are the assumptions that we're making if we want our strategy to work. Next slide, Alex. So the task is you're going to go into breakout rooms. You'll have about 5 minutes in your breakout rooms as a district. And we want you to brainstorm 2 to 3 assumptions that must be true for your strategy or strategies to work. And then record these in your theory of action. If one person is just keeping it for the team, that's fine. So record it in your theory of action and consider what is within your influence and what is outside of your influence. So things that you can influence and things that you're not able to. Any questions before we go into breakouts?
And I'd really put you to consider again what is like within your influence and what is without outside of your influence, and having assumptions within both those, because obviously those within our influence are a lot easier to control, especially when we're thinking about PLC times. Like, we can provide the times. You can say this is what it needs to be used for, but there's so many things outside of your control. So how are you going to, like, what are the assumptions that will be true for that time to actually be used in the way that you're intending for it? And those are really big pieces that we have to think about in ensuring that our strategy is going to help us meet that root cause, meet that need, and really address everything. So just really think about, again, both of those within and outside of your influence.
Okay,
I'm gonna
we're gonna
open
go
up.
into breakout rooms.
Yep, I'm gonna open up the rooms. And then we will come back together at 9. We'll do 9. Let's do 9.
18, yeah. Alex, stop the recording. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to take a few minutes to have your district share out assumptions that you identified or that you came up with during your breakout room. So we'll let whoever wants to go first.
I can share Lidl's. So part of it is we haven't met yet. So we haven't worked through all of like our strategies. So we're we said our first assumption is the same one that's the example, is that teachers will use protected time effectively for instructional planning. We feel like that's going to touch our ideal state and kind of what we're thinking is our strategy is going to be, but since we haven't fleshed that all the way out yet. And then another assumption that we think is going to be one of our assumptions, we assume is going to be one of our assumptions, is that teachers and school leaders actually knowing what PLC is and its function in supporting instructional practices. So those are the two that we assume are going to be our assumptions at this point, without us having the strategy quite yet.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Vital Team. Temple Team.
Okay, so we have several, I think that the first few the group worked on previously at the meeting, but I didn't attend, and then we added 2 more. So the first 7 are, we assume that clear non-negotiable policies and guidelines are in place. We assume that protected time is built into master schedules. We assume that campus and district leaders are trained and accountable. We assume that cross-departmental communication is streamlined. We assume that PLCs operate with a consistent instructionally focused framework. We assume that teachers are actively engaged in the planning process, and we assume that progress is monitored and adjusted. And the 2 that we added from our discussion, and based on just things that we've seen in PLCs just over the past few weeks that we've been in school, is that communication and training related to PLC is consistent and aligned across the district, and that all stakeholders have an aligned understanding of the purpose of the time blocks that are dedicated to PLC work.
All right. Thank you. Thank you both, Temple and Lido, for sharing. We're going to hop into outcomes. Alex, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and completely understand and appreciate that you guys haven't been able to meet. It's just the start of the school year, nothing too insane, right? But appreciate you guys just being able to jump in and kind of have those discussions, even if you don't have a strategy fully identified. Like you guys said, the assumptions that you were talking about are going to be potentially relevant regardless of the strategy. And I think that they feed into of what strategy, what approach do we take in making sure that everything is feeding and making sense. So I would push, as you guys are continuing to have these conversations around identifying strategies, have all these assumptions in the back of your mind, making sure that they're kind of like checking the boxes of, is there anything else that we need to add on to our strategy to ensure that these assumptions are going to be met? Like, what is within our control that we can further influence? Oops. Sorry, my mouse is going wild. All right, so as Latanya mentioned, we're gonna jump in and talk about outcomes now. This is kind of the second part to close out our theory of action discussion. Then we are going to be jumping into the first part of the implementation plan. After this section, we'll kind of have a summary of here's what we're asking you to do to complete your theory of action, because we know we're kind of jumping from theory of action to implementation plan. We'll explain why we're doing that in the same training when we get there, but just know at the end of this section, we'll have clear next steps of here's what you need to do for your theory of action. But obviously, outcomes are very important for us to discuss, especially when we're talking about a theory of action and an implementation plan. So with outcomes, I know all of you are more than fluent in these, but just kind of wanted to cover what we're looking for in our theory of action. So the question being addressed with this outcome statement is, what change do we expect to see if the strategy works? So we want to be looking at both short-term outcomes within the next 3 to 6 months and long-term outcomes within the next 1 to 2 years. So short-term outcomes would be shifts in practice, experience, or capacity. An example would be by October 2025, 100% of campuses will implement a revised master schedule with a minimum of 240 uninterrupted planning minutes per week. So it's something that's most often more process related of, we will have these in place. We don't know what the outcome of that will be, but we will have it in place. It's really being able to be measured by kind of through fidelity measures. Now, the long-term outcomes are when we're looking at the impact on teachers, students, and the system. So this is really kind of where we're going to be addressing that root cause, addressing the need that we previously identified. So an example could be by December 2026, teacher time diaries will show at least a 30% increase in reported uninterrupted planning time. So it's getting at that full goal of being able to give the teachers more uninterrupted planning time. When we're writing these outcomes, we really want to make sure that they are SMART. So we know that means that they're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So when we say specific, we want it to be a clearly defined change, making sure it's really addressing straight back to that root cause, straight back to that need. You want to be able to kind of read through, especially in your theory of action, of here's what we identified as the problem, here's the strategy, here's what we expect to see. We also want it to be measurable. We really want it to be quantifiable with data so that 1, we can measure change, and 2, we can then modify as needed if we're not seeing the impact that we want to be. So for example, when you're looking at a short-term outcome, if you weren't able to have 100% of campuses implementing a revised master schedule at the time allocated, you would know that in real time and then be able to adjust of, okay, we know campus A, B, and C have been able to implement, but D and E are struggling. What can we do? We also want it to be achievable, so realistic within the context. Relevant, again, we want it to be aligned to the strategy and theory of action. And lastly, we want it to be time-bound. So it's really important that these outcomes have those timeframes in them, knowing that we gave kind of some like 3 to 6 months for short-term, 1 to 2 years for long-term. It could be a little bit different, just trying to give you an idea of how to think about short-term versus long-term. So again, an example of a SMART outcome would be that by June 2026, 90% of teachers will report having at least 4 hours of protected planning time per week. A non-example would be that teachers will have more planning time. So again, we want to have those specifics around the time frame, the specific like percentages, how we're measuring that, what more actually consists of. So what we're going to do, even though we know that you are still kind of working on the strategy piece, I think being able to at least practice this process for a little bit will be helpful. So we're going to have you go into breakout rooms again, and we're going to have you spend 8 minutes brainstorming potential long-term and short-term outcomes. So I think what we would want you to do first is kind of just do a brainstorm of what do you want to see change. Remember working from your ideal statement. What are some potential outcomes? And from that brainstorm list, make sure that at least one of those is written as a SMART short-term outcome. Any questions about this? And again, even if I know that we don't have the strategies completely solidified, it's just being able to kind of go and practice this, knowing kind of the route that you guys are taking. All right, if no questions, then I'm going to go and open up the breakout rooms again. And then we will come back together at 9:39. All right, welcome back. Hopefully that gave you some time to just again start kind of brainstorming some potential outcomes. We're not going to have you share out right now, but one of your next steps is going to be, as you guys meet as teams to talk about those strategies, is to also be brainstorming those outcomes and be prepared to share kind of what you're thinking at your September coaching call. So just kind of have that as a discussion point during your next meeting. So right now of kind of talking about the theory of action, kind of putting it all together. We're going to have the theory of action in kind of two different forms. There's the theory of action narrative that you've been working on, and this is on the left where it's a little bit more detailed, where it has your problem statement, root cause, ideal state, strategy, assumptions, and outcomes. So having the more granular detail to be able to tell that story around what you notice from your needs assessment, and then what strategy you're going to be implementing and what change you expect to see. So it's really phase 2 of linking between phase 1, the needs assessment, and phase 3, the implementation plan. The next one that we'll also be talking about that you'll also be morphing your narrative into is a more summarized theory of action visual that is in your implementation plan. So this is really just a high level overview of the theory of action, where you'll put, if we implement this strategy, then we expect to see these short-term outcomes, which will lead to these long-term outcomes or systemic improvements. So just as an overview, that's kind of what is the next steps of those final deliverables for your theory of action. And so your next steps to complete your theory of action are to identify and record your strategy, identify and record the assumptions that must be true for the identified strategies to be successful in your theory of action narrative, identify and record your SMART short and long-term outcomes in your theory of action narrative. Again, really ensuring that they are SMART. I think the best approach to do that is first brainstorming all of your different goals or outcomes, and then going through and making sure that they're all meeting the SMART criteria. And then we'll have you, once you have the narrative finished, of summarizing that into your theory of action visual that's in the implementation plan. So now I'm going to jump in and actually talk about this implementation plan and how you will complete that theory of action component of it. So first, to provide an overview of the implementation plan. And first, I want to note that the full plan, because it's pretty big, is going to be covered during the October training. Today, we're just going to be kind of dipping our toes into it, looking at the first 2 tabs that are focusing on the theory of action, as well as the measurement tab.
Do you want me to drop it in the chat, Alex?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. I'm going to walk through and kind of show it to you as well in a second, but really we want you to only focus on those first 2 tabs today. After the call, you're more than able to go through and look more, but I really want us to focus on these first 2 tabs right now. The implementation plan includes the following. So there's the theory of action tab, which includes, again, that high level overview. The measurement plan tab of where you'll be kind of listing out for each strategy, what outcomes are associated, and then how you'll actually be doing that. And then identifying your stakeholders. So having a stakeholder engagement plan, having a change management plan, a communication plan, work stream owners, and then a project plan. So as you can see, there's a lot of different pieces, hence why we really want to be focusing on just these first 2 pieces today that are really linking your theory of action to your implementation plan. So tab 1 is the theory of action implementation plan. So again, this is the first tab and where you'll be entering your theory of action. So what you're going to want to do in this first box up here is where you'll enter your strategies in the dark blue, your short-term outcomes in the green, and then your long-term outcomes in the light blue. Again, this will happen after you finish your theory of action narrative. You'll just kind of summarize it, enter it into here. This is just so we have our overall theory of action and measurement piece incorporated into your plan. The other piece that you're going to update on your theory of action tab are these key strategies. So right now we have high school master schedule, apply for ADSI, fall PLC reboot. These are just kind of some placeholders, but what you'll want to do is enter your strategies because these will feed directly into tab 2, the measure to learn or measurement plan tab. So it's just important that whatever you enter in here, you also enter into these rows. So when I said and mentioned those strategies on that previous page, this is where they'll pull directly into the second tab in the measurement plan. So you'll see there's high school master schedule, apply for ADSI, fall PLC reboot. So this will just transfer automatically into that second tab where it'll show you these are the strategies. In the measurement plan tab, this is what is presented. For each strategy, you'll put the associated outcome. So what will be different for teachers or students when this outcome is met? You should include both short-term and long-term outcomes. And then we really want to be detailing how you're going to be monitoring that data. So first, you'll include the data source that is needed to progress monitor. For example, a PLC tracker, a master schedule. If it's more process oriented, it's going to be just being able to review and have access to that material. Or maybe it's a teacher survey. The next piece are the specific measures or data variables provided in the data source that will be used to progress monitor. So for example, if you included the data source as not necessarily applicable in this case, but looking at like a STAR test, then in the specific measures or data variables, you would include this specific data point that you were looking at, for example, math performance levels. Next, you would include the level of detail that you'll look at. So you're looking at the individual student level, individual teacher level, grade level, district, campus level, getting granular into how you're looking at the data. The whole goal of the measurement plan is to really make sure that you have it laid out that 1, all of your outcomes are measurable, and 2, you have a plan to be regularly collecting and using and reviewing that data. This next tab is going over kind of an example of that, using both a short-term and a long-term outcome. So if we look at this first one, we can see that the first outcome is by October 2025, 100% of campuses will implement revised master schedules with a minimum of 240 uninterrupted planning minutes per week. So the data source for that would just be the submitted master schedule, being able to review that and say, yes, this includes that, or no, it does not. The specific variables or measures that you would be looking at within that is just making sure that they had allocated planning time within the master schedule. And then we would want to be looking at this at the campus level, because that speaks to our outcome of being able to say that 100% of campuses were at the campus level or were revised. Looking at the long-term outcome, which is by June 2026, 90% of teachers report at least 4 hours of planning time. This, we identified the data source as being the teacher survey that's asking around kind of time use. The specific question in the survey that we would be using, it could have been more than one survey question as well, but in this example, it's percent of teachers reporting at least 4 hours of planning time. And then we want to look at this at the grade and campus level of being able to look at it granularly. Are there any differences between campuses? Are some having more time than others? So again, it's really getting granular and thinking about how you are going to be able to present this data. Before I jump into next steps, I'm also going to walk through the implementation plan a little bit more, just to show you all. Make sure you can still see. Zoom in a little bit more. So again, here is the implementation plan. Again, all the tabs down here, there's a lot. Again, just for today and for your discussion through the end of September, I would focus on just the theory of action and measure to learn tabs. You can see them all here. This first one is where you'll be inputting the theory of action summary. Down here with the note is where you'll be updating your key strategies. Once you have these updated, they will automatically pull into this tab, measure to learn, and update in these drop boxes. So it'll just make it easy for you to verify that for each strategy, you have at least one outcome that you're measuring. It's also important that you have, I would say, at least one short-term and at least one long-term outcome. Again, because the difference between short-term and long-term being that short-term is looking more at the process piece, the long-term being looking at that impact piece. We're able to better measure and understand why impact is happening if we have that process measure to be able to look at if stuff is being implemented with fidelity, what changes need to be able to made. In here is where you'll just directly enter all of this data in the measurement plan. Again, feel free on your own to go through the remaining tabs, but we'll be covering all of these tabs during the October session in detail. Any questions about the theory of action or measurement plan tabs?
Really quickly, I just wanted to apologize. I dropped in the deck again. I just caught that. Well, Dr. Tate just flagged that in the note catcher. The deck was actually the August deck that we had linked, and it wasn't September. So I just revised it and dropped the deck in just so you all can follow along. So sorry for the interruption, but thank you for that, Dr. Tate.
All right, I'm going to go back to the deck. And again, I know that we kind of covered a lot today and with two different kind of moving pieces. But again, just wanting to present how the theory of action, we're going to be closing that out. But that measurement plan piece is really what is linking the theory of action to this implementation plan, and why we really wanted to be cognizant of thinking about and brainstorming our outcomes, how we're going to measure that, because that is integral to our implementation plan. So in terms of what is coming up, you'll have your DQI team coaching call on either September 25th or 26th. And this is when we're going to be reviewing your theory of action and then also your drafted measurement plan. The theory of action is due, that narrative piece, on September 30th. So you'll have to submit that on the hub. The visual of that in your implementation plan is not due that day. It's just the theory of action narrative. And then on October 3rd is your next training, and that's when we're going to be going through the full implementation plan, all of those remaining tabs and how to complete those. So again, as homework, feel free to peruse those. I just don't want you to get overwhelmed because we're going to be going through that in more detail. But if you are a pre-learner and pre-thinker and it helps you to kind of like go through beforehand, go for it. Your next steps. We have a couple more next steps than usual. So I want to spend some time to go through these. Again, the first ones are really focused on that theory of action. So first, making sure that you've identified your strategies that you are going to carry forward. Identify and record the assumptions that must be true for each of those strategies to be successful. Both of those should be recorded in your theory of action narrative. Then you're also going to identify and record your outcomes, having at least one short and one long term for each strategy in your theory of action narrative. Once you have those pieces, the strategy, assumptions, and outcomes completed, your theory of action narrative is completed. Once you have that completed, then you can kind of just summarize that into your theory of action visual that's in your implementation plan. So again, that's just saying, here's the strategies we're going to implement, what we expect to see in terms of short-term outcomes, and the impact we expect to see in terms of long-term outcomes. And then you'll upload your final theory of action narrative to the hub. You don't have to worry about the implementation plan. That's not due for a couple months. Only that theory of action narrative. Then we're also asking that you have drafted, not finalized, just begun thinking about and have some kind of pen to paper, your measurement plan for your September coaching call. This is because as you're thinking about and having these outcome discussions, we want the measurement piece to be integrated within those conversations. We want to be making sure that we are saying, this is how we are going to measure this. So we want you to just record your thoughts, how you are thinking about how you'll be measuring those, using what existing data tools your district already has, or if there's anything from the teacher time study that we implemented in terms of like the district survey, the time diaries, the observations that you would like to move forward and carry forward in continuing to collect that data. So again, it's not a final measurement plan, but just have that kind of drafted and prepare to discuss that with your outcomes. And then also lastly, reach out to LaTanya if you would like to have a more in-depth conversation around LASSO grants and all of those different strategies that are in the TTS resource library. LaTanya and Sarah both have a ton of extensive knowledge and experience with all of the LASSO grants. So can definitely talk to you more about what different grants entail, what the process is, and then which one she thinks could be a good fit for you. That was a lot. So before I move forward, want to stop and ask if there are any questions around next steps. No? All right, well then we're finishing up just a couple minutes early. LaTanya, if you don't mind sharing the exit ticket, thank you. As always, just please complete that. That records that you attended today as well as provides us feedback. As always, all the information, the recording will be uploaded to the information hub so that you can go back and check there. Also, if anything comes up before our coaching calls, because I know we have a month almost or 20 days between that, as always, feel free to reach out to us. We can always jump on a call to talk about different LASSO grant options, strategies, how they can fit, as well as just kind of talk about the theory of action in general. So don't be a stranger in the next 2.5 weeks as we have some time apart. Always feel free to reach out. Otherwise, it was really good to see everyone, and I hope you enjoy your weekend.
Bye, all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.